So, what is Dice Masters? Dice Masters is a two-player card and dice game where you attempt to reduce your opponent's life total to 0 before they do the same to you. First person to reduce their opponent's life to 0 is the winner, so in that sense it's very similar to other card battle games out there like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic the Gathering. How do you reduce their life points? Throughout the game you're going to use energy to purchase dice that match the cards that you brought and use them in a variety of ways to deal damage to your opponent. So what do you need to get started? Well, you're going to need a team. What's a team? Think of a team like a deck in most other games. You pre-construct your team with cards and dice that you find interesting, fun, or synergistic, and bring it to the table to battle with your opponents. Traditionally, teams are made up of 8 cards, of which only you can use, and 2 basic action cards, which we'll get into later. This means that you only really need 10 total cards in order to play the game in its standard format. In this configuration, both players start with 20 life. If you'd prefer to play something like a starter game, then the recommended team size would be 2 to 4 cards and 1 basic action per person, and a lowered total health, something like 10 to 15 health. You'll also need 8 of these sidekick dice. They're white, they've got 5 different energy symbols on them: bolt, mask, shield, fist, and a question mark, which can be used in place of those other symbols, and a little pawn character with 1 attack and 1 defense. Those energy symbols are what you'll need to buy stuff and use those special abilities. Sometimes abilities will ask for a specific symbol, like a bolt or a fist, in order to use it, and so you'll have to have one of those if you want to trigger that text, but more on that later. In addition to the cards that you put on your team, you're also going to need some dice to go with them. Now, this is where team construction and gameplay in Dice Masters differs a little bit from other games. Rather than playing the cards on your team to do things like you would with a standard deck game where you draw cards and play them from your hand, you're going to be purchasing corresponding dice that match the cards during the game. The dice that you buy during the game will be the driving force behind your success while you play. Those cards that you bring to the table will almost always just sit there to tell you what that little die you purchased costs, what its ability is, that sort of thing. So let's go back to cards for a moment. What kinds of cards can you put on your team? Well, there are 3 types of cards. The first are character cards. These are cards whose dice you'll use to punch your opponent in the face. After you purchase and roll this die that goes with the character card, you can put them out in the field and fight with them, attacking and blocking as you see fit. Very much similar to other games you've probably played. They have a name and a subtitle at the top, stat lines at the bottom. They have an energy type as well as a purchase cost at the top. They've got some ability text in the text box. They've got a rarity stripe telling you how rare the card is right here. And they have this little die limit at the bottom right here. This tells you how many of those dice you can assign to the card when you play. Also, there's this handy little side tracker that tells you what each side of the die looks like, so you don't have to pick up a die and kind of spin it around. And as you can see, there are 3 little energy symbols of some random type. Could be bolt, could be fist. And there are 3 stat line symbols with character faces, and those are called character sides. Notice the stats get stronger as you go from left to right. The left side stat line is the level 1 side, the middle one is level 2, and then the top one's level 3. Sometimes abilities reference that, but there you go. The second type of card you can put on your team are action cards. The dice that correspond with action cards are generally very simple. If you roll any of these little action faces, then you get to play the action and use the ability that's printed on the card. And if you roll the energy, then you can use that energy to buy stuff, just like you can with characters if you rolled those as energy. Those 2 types of cards will make up your 8-card team, and the final type of card in the game is the basic action card. This plays almost exactly the same as normal action cards, but differs in one very important way. Normally, you're the only one that has access to purchasing the dice that are on your 8-card team of characters and actions. However, both players can purchase dice found on the basic actions that each one of them brings, meaning that you can pick up your opponent's basic action dice by buying them, and then you can use them, and they can do the same to yours. Not on your normal team though, just the basic actions. Outside of that, basic actions play just the same as normal actions that would be on your team. If you roll this little burst face that looks like a comic book style POW symbol, then you can play the die to use the printed ability on the card. If you roll it on this 2 side, that's 2 generic energy, meaning you can just pay 2 energy for something. Doesn't count for one of those special symbols, but if you needed to pay extra for something that's really expensive, then you can just use this 2 generic side. Now, there are some corner cases when it comes to action dice about how you play them, but those come in the form of keywords, and that's a story for another time. Really, this is just one of those fire and forget things. You put the die out off to the side and then use the ability. So now we know what you'll need to play the game and what you need to build a team. If you'd like tips on team building, I'd recommend checking out my How to Build a Team video. Let's move on to gameplay because it's very interesting. So let's start with big picture. In Dice Masters, the way that gameplay works is a little different than what you would do in a normal card game. In card games, you generally just draw from your deck and you can play things from your hand based on some criteria, however the game sets itself up, using mana, playing creatures of this type or that type. In Dice Masters, while you have brought those things to the table, you actually have to purchase them throughout the game. Think of like a card battle game combined with a deck building game. Throughout the game, you're going to be purchasing dice that you think you'll need at certain times whenever you have the energy for it, and then you're going to be rolling those dice at times and trying to use them to kill your opponent. So you're building your team both before the game starts and then throughout the game dynamically. It's a really cool twist on a simple 1 versus 1 card game because you actually get to see what your opponent is doing at all times and they can see what you're doing at all times. Very strategic. All right, so this is how you start a game. Get yourself a mat, maybe the one in the little rule book that comes in the back of the starter set or the team box, whatever you got. Get yourself 8 sidekick dice and a bag. Put the 8 sidekick dice in the bag. Randomly decide who goes first. And once you get going, then each player will take their turn one at a time and move through these same 5 phases in order. Phase 1, the clear and draw step. The first thing you always do is check your reserve pool. That's this zone here where you put any dice that you haven't used to see if anything is still there from the previous turn. If there is, then it gets cleared away and goes to the used pile. That's this zone over here where dice you buy go and where stuff you've used previously sit and wait to be drawn and used again. Easy, so just push that stuff over there. Once you've cleared, then you draw 4 dice from the little bag that holds things for you and you put them in the prep area over here. That area might also have some dice from a previous turn in it, and that's okay. Obviously at the beginning of the game it won't though. Phase 1 complete, now on to phase 2. This is the roll and reroll step. In this step, take all of the dice from the prep area and roll them. Take a look at what you've got and then decide if you'd like to re-roll any of those dice. Maybe you want different energy symbols, maybe you want one of those character dice to come up with stats, whatever you want. Scoop up those dice that you'd like to try again and change, and then roll them. Once you've re-rolled any dice, you must keep everything you've got. After you finish rolling, everything goes into the reserve pool, and that leads us to phase 3. Phase 3, the main step. This is the point where you can actually use all of the dice that you've just rolled. There are a few different actions that you can take, and you can do them in any order that you like. One thing that you can do is buy dice. Remember, this game is a bit different in that your dice are your characters, and you don't start with them in play. In order to get them, you need to buy them by paying energy equal to the purchase cost found on the top left of the card. Now, every die you roll has some sort of energy on the cube itself. Characters and action dice have 3 energy sides apiece, so you can use the energy found on those sides as well as any energy you've rolled on sidekick dice to buy your stuff. If the purchase cost number on a card says 5, then you pay 5 of your energy, and most cards have a little energy symbol next to the number. That means that one of the dice that you spend to pick up that character or action has to match the symbol on the card. So if I wanted to buy this bishop here, I'd need to pay 5 energy, and one of those energy would have to be a shield because of that shield symbol up there. The energy used to purchase dice goes into this spent pile to show that it can't be touched again since you already spent it. Then the die that you bought goes into the used pile. That is purchasing in a nutshell. Another thing you can do during this step is to field characters. If you rolled a character face on any of your dice during your roll and reroll step, then you can put them out in the field zone to use as an attacker or a blocker. In order to do this, you may need to pay the fielding cost on the character face, which you'll find in the top left of the die. Pay that with whatever energy you'd like. There's no specific energy type that's necessary. Whatever energy you spend goes into that out of play spent pile that we talked about a moment ago, and then you put that character die out into the field zone. That's this zone above the reserve pool right here. If you put a die in the field zone, then you might want to check to see if it has any special effect when it goes into the field. If so, then you get to use that ability right after it hits the field zone. Oh, last thing. If you, for any reason, choose not to field a character die during this main step, then when you've finished the main step, it goes to the used pile. Finally, you can use things called global abilities during the main step. A global ability can be found on the bottom of a bunch of different types of cards, and it is marked by red text and a big bold global printed on it. Normally, card abilities can only be used by whoever controls that card, whoever brought it to the table. My opponent can't use the ability printed on this Plague Marine here if they didn't bring one themselves. Globals, however, can be used by both players. To use a global, pay the cost mentioned in the text and then use the ability. You pay using energy from your reserve pool just like anything else, and that energy goes to that spent pile just like before. You can use globals here in the main step as well as in the end of the next step. Alright, once you're done doing whatever you'd like with your energy, you have to give your opponent an opportunity to use any energy they've saved from their last turn. Generally, they can spend this on global abilities. When they do that, they pass back over to you, and you can either do more stuff with what you've got or move on to the next step. Next step is the attack step. Here's how attacking works in Dice Masters. If you've played Magic the Gathering, then this should look very familiar. The first thing you do is declare attackers. Any of those character dice that you have in the field can attack. Move any attacking dice into the attack zone to show your opponent what's coming at them. When you move a die to the attack zone up here, it may trigger a special ability, so trigger that when the die goes into the attack zone. Next, your opponent declares blockers. They choose which of their character dice in the field zone they want to block with and what those dice block. Each blocker can only block one attacker, but multiple blockers can gang up on one single attacker. Move blocking dice to the attack zone across from the dice that they block to kind of show that that is engaged with that other character. After blockers are declared, both players get the chance to use any energy that they've saved to activate global abilities. The active player gets to use their globals first, and once they're done, the defending player has an opportunity to use them as well. After all of that, everything deals their damage at the same time. Unblocked attackers deal their attack damage to the opponent's life total, and then they move to the used pile, which is really interesting. So if something goes through unblocked during the attack step, then it actually goes to used and sits for a while out of the field zone, and your opponent doesn't necessarily have to deal with it anymore, at least not for a little while. All attacking characters that end up being blocked will deal their damage to their blockers, and blockers will deal their damage to the attackers. Both happen at the same time. There's no like one and then the other. If two or more dice blocked a single attacker, then the attacker gets to kind of split their damage if they want, and they can choose how they want to split it. So they could deal some over here to this blocker and some over here to that blocker. Blocking character dice deal all of their damage to the attacker that they block. There is no splitting, obviously. If a character die ever takes damage like over the turn or during this attack step that is equal to or greater than their defense stat on the bottom right, then that character die is KO'd and it goes straight to its owner's prep area, meaning that they'll add it to their roll next turn and roll it in their roll and reroll step, which is a super cool mechanic because things just keep cycling around. Now that all of that is done and all damage has been dealt, the attack step ends and you move into the cleanup step. This is the fifth and final step. Any character dice that didn't get KO'd or go through unblocked go back to their field zones and heal back up to full. Damage dealt in Dice Masters does not stick around past the turn, so you don't have to keep track of that. Any action dice that are still in your reserve pool now go to the used pile, so you push that off over to the used pile, and that wraps up a standard turn in Dice Masters. Your opponent takes over and moves through these same 5 steps: clear and draw, roll and reroll, main step, attack step, and cleanup. So not too different from a standard card game in terms of turn order or general mechanics, but several very interesting gameplay twists found in there. All right, a few final things. The very first turn that the first player plays is a bit different than a normal turn. A bunch of study and data showed that being the first player to get to do stuff makes you much more likely to win down the road. So in order to try and balance that first turn advantage out, the first player draws 4 of their sidekick dice from their bag, places 1 of them in the spent pile before rolling, and then rolls and uses 3 sidekicks to kick off their first turn, rather than the standard 4 that they would do for any other turn going forward. Like I said, that only ever happens during the first turn of the game, and that's just to sort of mitigate that first turn advantage. Once you pass that, it's draw 4 and roll them. Next thing, you may be wondering, when do the dice that are in the used pile actually get used? Well, during the clear and draw step, if you reach into your bag and you only have like 3 dice or 2 dice or 0 dice, and you can't draw 4, then you refill your bag with the stuff from the used pile and draw back up to 4. So if you pull the final die in your bag, so you have 1, you need 3 more, so you take everything in used, put it all in your bag, shake up your bag, don't look, pull 3 more, and now all of a sudden you might have that character that you purchased or that went through unblocked, and there's this little cycle that is created where everything goes from used to the bag, to the reserve pool, maybe to the field, or back into used, and around it goes. And that's part of the strategy of the game, is managing that carousel effect. Here's another thing. Some cards have abilities that gain you life, but you can't go over the max 20 life in this game. There is no over healing past 20. There are several different variants of the same character and action throughout the game. You can only have 1 card of the same name on your team, however, meaning that you can't have 2 different Captain Americas on the same team. You can, however, have like a Bruce Wayne and a Batman on the same team because the names on the card are different. Yeah, technically they're the same in the comics, but for the rules purposes of this game, just look for non-matching names. no 2 Supermans, no 3 Wonder Womans. You get the picture. So there you go. That's Dice Masters in a pinch. That's how to play the game. That's how to set yourself up. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive rules session that we've just gone through. There are extra rules for very specific things like targeting and talking about certain types of keywords, because keywords exist in this game that tell you to do certain things when you see them. But if you've followed along with the video this far, then you have a really good base working knowledge of how to play the game. And that's what you need to start out with. If this video helped you at all, feel free to leave a comment below telling me what you enjoyed about it. Let me know if you'd like me to make another video talking about any more of the more in-depth rules. If you have any base level questions about the rules of the game or how to set anything up, put those in the comments and I may collect up those and make a frequently asked questions video. And yeah, if you're thinking about learning how to play the game, I hope this helps you get your feet wet or encourages you to give it a shot, because it really is a super fun game. As always, thanks for watching.